The town of Dry River doesn't appear on most maps. If you drive north out of Ely, Nevada, and keep going long enough that the radio fades into static and the road loses its paint, you'll eventually pass a sun-bleached sign leaning at an angle. The letters are almost gone. The wind has sanded them flat over the years. Population 214. That number hasn't changed in decades. I arrived in late October 2018. I was contracted to service a weather monitoring station owned by a private research firm out of Reno. It was supposed to be a routine 3-day job: recalibrate sensors, replace a failing relay tower, and log the atmospheric data backlog. Dry River sat in a shallow basin ringed by low mountains that looked soft from a distance, but were sharp and broken up close. The air had a mineral smell to it. Metallic. The kind of dryness that cracks your lips in an hour. The town itself was quiet but functional. A gas pump that still used analog numbers. A grocery store the size of a garage. A diner with 6 stools and a coffee pot that never seemed to empty. The people were polite in the way isolated communities often are. Curious, but careful. When they asked why I was there and I told them about the weather station, there was a pause. Not long, just long enough to notice. "Oh," the diner owner said. "Up in quiet sector?" I asked what that meant. She shook her head slightly, like she'd spoken out of turn. "That's just what folks call that stretch. Dead air up there. Radios don't work right." She said it casually, but her hand tightened on the coffee pot. The weather station was 20 miles outside town, beyond a stretch of desert that looked flat until you drove it. The ground rolled in subtle waves. The sky felt enormous. There were no birds, no insects, just wind moving over gravel. When I reached the station, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the absence of noise, the pressure of it. Even the wind sounded muted, as if something were absorbing it. My truck engine echoed strangely when I shut it off, a hollow, swallowed sound that didn't seem to belong to open space. The station tower stood intact, but the instruments were coated in a thin gray film I didn't recognize. It looked like ash but felt oily when I touched it. It smeared instead of dusting away. My handheld radio crackled when I tried to call the office. A burst of static, then nothing. I climbed back into the truck and tried again. Dead. I checked the battery. Full. I told myself it was interference. Solar activity. Faulty equipment. The desert is full of simple explanations. Still, I worked faster than I needed to. As the sun lowered, the temperature dropped with unnatural speed. The shadows stretched too long, too thin. When I locked up the station and started the truck, the headlights flickered before stabilizing. For a second, in the dark beyond the beams, I thought I saw movement. Not a shape, just the suggestion that the darkness had shifted. I drove back to Dry River without turning on the radio. The first night, the power went out at 2:17 a.m. I know the time because the motel clock froze there. The red numbers hung in the dark, burned into my vision. The silence woke me. When power fails in a city, there's still a distant hum. Traffic. Transformers. Something. In Dry River, the outage erased everything. Even the refrigerator in the front office stopped ticking. I lay in bed, listening to nothing. Then I heard a tone. It was faint and steady. A low, mechanical hum that didn't come from any direction I could place. It felt like it was inside the room, inside my skull. The pitch was just below comfort, a vibration that made my teeth ache. I sat up. The air felt thick, pressurized. The hum grew louder for maybe 5 seconds. Then it stopped. At the exact moment it stopped, the power returned. The clock reset to 12 o'clock and began blinking. In the morning, the motel owner said the outage hadn't lasted more than a second. Storms surged somewhere, he said, though the sky was clear. I drove back to the station. Halfway there, I saw a herd of wild horses standing perfectly still beside the road. They were facing the same direction, heads raised, ears forward. None of them moved as I passed. Not one blinked. The station was worse. The gray film had thickened overnight. It coated the tower cables like frost. My boots stuck slightly when I walked. Every step made a faint peeling sound. The instruments were malfunctioning in ways I'd never seen. The barometric pressure readings swung wildly between extremes. Temperature sensors reported freezing conditions despite the sun beating down. And the audio recorder we used for wind patterns had captured something. I plugged in my headphones and played the file. At first, it was just static. Then, under the static, a rhythm. A repeating pulse that didn't match any natural pattern. It was too precise, too deliberate. Between the pulses, there were gaps of total silence. Not quiet. Silence. The kind that feels engineered. I stopped the playback and pulled off the headphones. The desert around me looked unchanged. The mountains sat where they always had. The sky was empty, but I felt watched. The sensation was physical, a weight between my shoulder blades. I turned in a full circle. There was nothing. The radio still didn't work. When I drove back to town, I passed a rancher standing in his field. He was looking up, shading his eyes. His cattle were clustered tightly together, pressing against the fence, breathing hard. I followed his gaze. The sky was clear. Still, I kept looking long after I should have stopped. By the third day, everyone in Dry River knew something was wrong. The grocery store freezer failed overnight, spoiling hundreds of dollars of meat. Car batteries died without warning. Phones displayed full signal bars but couldn't complete a call. At noon, every dog in town started barking at once. It wasn't chaotic barking. It was synchronized, a single wave of sound that rose and held. The dogs faced the same direction, north, toward the basin. The barking went on for almost a minute. Then it cut off mid-breath. Every dog fell silent at the exact same instant. People stood in the street, staring at each other. No one laughed. No one made a joke. The air felt charged, like the seconds before lightning strikes. I drove back to the station with the sheriff riding shotgun. He hadn't slept. His eyes were red and unfocused. "You hear it last night?" he asked. I nodded. "That hum," he said. "It's been coming closer." We didn't talk after that. When we reached the basin, the sky looked wrong. It was the same color, but depthless, like a painted backdrop. The mountains seemed flatter, compressed. The sheriff's radio emitted a high whine and died. My truck engine sputtered, but kept running. As we approached the station, the air temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in front of me. Frost formed along the windshield edges despite the desert sun. The gray film now covered the ground in a wide circle around the tower. It glistened faintly, reflecting light that didn't seem to come from anywhere. My ears popped. Pressure. The sheriff stepped out and staggered. He clutched his head. "You feel that?" he whispered. I did. It was like descending too fast in an airplane. A crushing inward force. My vision narrowed at the edges. And then we heard it. The hum, louder than before. Close enough that the truck windows vibrated. The sound didn't travel through the air. It traveled through us. The sheriff dropped to one knee. Blood trickled from his nose. I looked up. The sky above the tower rippled. Not moved. Rippled. Like heat distortion, but thicker. The air folded over itself, revealing a darker layer underneath. Something vast occupied that space. I couldn't see it clearly. My eyes slid off it, refusing to focus. The shape was wrong. It had angles that didn't meet properly, curves that bent inward, a silhouette that changed every time I tried to define it. The hum deepened. My chest tightened. Every breath felt stolen. The sheriff was shouting, but I couldn't hear words. Only the vibration. The thing in the sky lowered slightly. The gray film on the ground rose in thin strands, drawn upward like iron filings to a magnet. Time slowed. Or maybe it stopped. I don't know how long we stood there. I only know that when the pressure released, I was on my back in the dirt, staring at an empty sky. The tower was gone. Not destroyed. Gone. The ground where it had stood was smooth and unmarked. The sheriff lay 10 feet away, unconscious, his face pale and wet with blood. The hum faded into the distance, and the silence returned. They told us later we were missing 4 hours. Neither of us remembered losing them. We drove back to town in a daze. The truck clock read 4:52 p.m. The sun was already setting. My hands shook on the wheel. Dry River looked abandoned. Doors hung open. Cars sat idling in the street. A bicycle lay on its side, front wheel spinning lazily. No people. The sheriff called out, his voice thin in the empty air. No answer. We searched the diner, the motel, the grocery store. Coffee still steamed in a cup on the counter. A radio played static. A jacket lay crumpled on the floor as if someone had stepped out of it. Then the hum returned. Inside the buildings, it was unbearable. The walls amplified it. The sheriff screamed and covered his ears. I felt blood run warm down my neck. The lights flickered. Every reflective surface in the diner, windows, chrome, glass, darkened at once. They no longer showed the room. They showed sky, a sky that wasn't ours. It was black and crowded with movement. Massive forms drifting just beyond sight. The same impossible geometry as the thing above the basin. One of them turned, not toward the sky and the reflection, toward us. The glass bulged inward. The surface stretched like liquid. Something pressed against it from the other side, testing the barrier. I couldn't move. The sheriff's scream cut off abruptly. The hum reached a pitch that erased thought. The glass shattered without sound. The black sky spilled into the room, swallowing the light. Cold wrapped around me. Not temperature. Absence. I felt hands on my shoulders. Too many hands. Each one gentle. Clinical. They turned my head upward. There was no face. Only depth. An opening that receded forever. Inside it, points of white flickered like distant stars. They pulsed in a rhythm I recognized. The same rhythm from the recording. It was communicating. Not in words. In pressure. In certainty. A message forced into my mind with absolute clarity. You are observed. Not a threat. A statement of fact. I tried to close my eyes. I couldn't. The depth leaned closer. My thoughts unraveled. Memories peeled away like wet paper. I saw a dry river from above. The basin. The tower. A map overlaying the land in lines and symbols I didn't understand. We weren't important. The town wasn't important. We were standing in a measurement. A calibration point. The hands released me. The black sky snapped back into the glass. The diner lights returned. I collapsed onto the floor, choking. The sheriff was gone. His hat lay beside me, still warm. They arrived before morning. Unmarked trucks. Helicopters without insignia. Men and women in plain gray uniforms who moved with practiced efficiency. They sealed the town in less than an hour. I was sedated twice. Questioned 3 times. Each session began with the same statement. There was no aerial event. They called it a gas leak. Mass hysteria. A coordinated hallucination triggered by environmental toxins. I signed papers I don't remember reading. Half the town never came back. Officially, they were relocated for medical treatment. Unofficially, their names vanished from records. Houses were emptied. Families erased. The basin was fenced off. The quiet sector became restricted land. Satellite images blurred the area into a smudge of beige. I was released after 6 days with a warning I didn't need. Don't talk about this. I didn't. For years. But I couldn't sleep without hearing the hum. Electronics failed around me. Watches stopped. Phones rebooted. Strangers stared too long, as if trying to place me. I checked missing persons databases obsessively. The sheriff's name never appeared. It was as if he had never existed. I went back once. 5 years later. The fence was still there, taller and reinforced. Warning signs in 3 languages. Beyond it, the basin looked unchanged. Flat. Silent. I stood at the perimeter and felt the pressure immediately. Faint, but present. A memory in the air. My phone died in my hand. The screen went black, reflecting my face. For a second, the reflection wasn't mine. The sky behind me was wrong. I didn't turn around. I knew if I did, I'd see the ripple again. The folded air. The geometry that didn't belong here. Instead, I listened. Under the wind, under my heartbeat, the hum waited. Patient. Distant. Still measuring. I understood then that the event hadn't ended. It had simply moved on. Dry River was a data point in a process too large to notice us individually. We were insects crossing a sensor beam, briefly acknowledged and forgotten. Except I wasn't forgotten. The message hadn't been for the town. It had been for me. You are observed. Not were. Are. I left the fence and drove until the mountains disappeared in my mirrors. The pressure eased, but it never vanished completely. Some nights, when the world is quiet enough, I hear the rhythm again. Not outside. Inside. A steady pulse behind my thoughts, matching the beat of something vast and distant, waiting to take another measurement. And every time the power flickers or a room falls too silent, I feel the air thicken, like it did in Dry River, like it's about to open. And I know, with absolute certainty, that wherever the next quiet sector forms, someone else will look up at an empty sky and feel watched, long before they see anything at all.